Hello, Salbonani. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm welcoming you today to yet another episode of empilweni, which is a podcast that we continue to do where we discuss the hot topics, those things that affect our lives, especially as Christians, and especially more so as African Zimbabwean, if you will, Christians. My name is Arthur Sibanda, Foga Sibanda Oga Mashake, Usegata Shanta, and with Anthony Usegatatu. I always struggle with his daughter's name, Umdluli, who is going to take us through a topic that is on misunderstanding missionaries. Kungenzeka yini ukuthi nxa sikhangele ama-missionary sigcine singasawazwisisi injongo yawo ababuya ngayo elizweni. Sometimes we may throw out the baby with the water, as we are told that we are trying to throw away the water because it's dirty, and you end up throwing the baby as well. So we maybe before he starts speaking, the questions that are just coming is someone came from their country, and they left their relatives, and they traveled in a ship, on a ship to another continent. Some of them even lost their lives. Some of them didn't live comfortably, and all those things. Then, of course, in our last episode, episodes rather, we're noticing how maybe the missionaries, their coming was followed by the colonialists, and we're asking ourselves, what is the relationship between the two? Well, after reflecting on all that, then maybe someone will say, well, these people never had a good intention. They always had bad intentions. All of them had bad intentions. So, which is what Anthony is trying to respond to today. Yes. So, that's your time.
And thank you very much for joining us, guys. There's an African saying which says "Zonelo amvunye." You know what does that mean? What does that mean to you, Arthur? Before I make my my presentation,
this is an idea that there is blame that is ascribed to the rest of the flock because of one sheep or one goat that has done, or the black sheep rather, to make it more. No, now I'm African. I've issues with black, or the purple sheep in the flock, because there's a purple sheep in the flock. Everyone thinks the rest of the sheep should be purple.
So basically, you use one person to ascribe bad intentions to everybody. So this is a very different. I think it's supposed to be a warning to say you should not look at a group of people. Let's say maybe and then uhlangane maybe lo muntu ovele lokhuzene eHarare umuntu lona sekutshontshela. The next thing is amashona ngamasela. It's one person. It's one person who's done something to you. So akumelanga uthathe into eyenziwe ngumuntu oyi-one ususithi ikutshela everything about abantu bonke lapha vela khona labantu bonke. All of us, we are different. Ngasikhangela indaba ye-racism. What is racism? It's treating people badly because of their skin color. And usually the excuse is you can always find someone of that skin color who's done something bad. And then you can now treat all of them badly. This is a bad way to approach things. So as we go into our subject of missionaries, of course, maybe someone will say, I'm trying to justify missionaries right away. But you would be right, but give me the time. Maybe I'm correctly justifying them or not. I just want to give a perspective of some of the things that we do and say. So why ngiqale ngelokhuze ngesitsho lesi esithi zonelwa mvuni? nxa singathatha into eziningi sizibambanise zibe into eyi-one, siyaphambanisa ukuthi sizwisise ukuthi ukuhamba njani. So in this case, when we're dealing with the issue of colonization and missionaries, okwenzakalayo ukuthi abantu bayahlanganisa into I think singathi maybe eziyi-three. I-colonization, which is ukuthathwa komhlaba, and ukuthumba umhlaba, I think maybe okwayenzakalayo, and colonization, slavery, which is the slave trade. So people will mix colonization and the slave trade, and then people will also mix that with missionaries, the missionary assignments. So those are three different things, but into ezithathu ezitshiyeneyo. But nxa abantu bekhuluma, because into lezi zingane ziyabambana njenge esikubalile ebhukwini leliyana, abantu bayakuhlanganisa konke kube into eyi-one. So ukwenzela ukuthi nxa umuntu esithi colonization was bad, then sesitsho futhi lokuthi missionaries are bad, and then sesitsho lokuthi slavery is bad. So ngokusuhlanganisa into eziyi-three ka-one, but into ezitshiyeneyo kumele uzibambe. Even if all three of them are bad, treat them all as separately. Ukwanisa ukubona no, why is colonization bad? Ukhulume ukuthi colonization is bad because of A, B, C, D. Why are missionaries bad? Then you can say missionaries are bad because of A, B, C, D. Why is the slave trade bad? The slave trade is bad for A, B, C, D. So just to make a clear difference, these two things are different. Being colonized and the slave trade, those are two different things. In the slave trade, babe kuthatha uhambe uyehlala kwenye indawo, far away from your relatives, far away from your family. You lose your identity. You lose your land. You lose your language. You don't even know where you come from. You lose your history. You go and live somewhere else, far away, and other people get money in exchange for your body, right? And you are never seen by your relatives ever again. That's the slave trade. Colonization, you are at home. You have your friends, you have your family. Maybe you can be moved, but you're moved as a group, as a whole family. Maybe you're getting paid, but you're not getting paid well. But it's different from slave trade. Those are two different things. In a colonial system, you're not counted as property. You're a person, but you're not property. In the slave trade, you are property. You have nothing to your name. You cannot own anything. You're a slave. So it's two different things. But if you're going to treat it as one thing, supambanisa khonapho. Ngasukubambanisele kuyi-two. So also ukwanisa ukuzwisisa kuhle. So the key to understanding these things is understanding the difference between missionaries and even ama-missionary lawo. Asomuntu oyi-one. Esikubaleleyo ebhukwini lethu, once again, I plug the book, Missions in Southern Rhodesia. Just look for that book. Even ama-missionaries lawo, abafanani. It's not the same group of people. They don't have the same abalanjongo eyodwa, balenjongo ezitshiyeneyo. Yikho ama-missionaries abuya ngama-groups atshiyeneyo. So ukuphonga ukuthi ama-missionaries wonke babele njongo embi. Yeah, kuyakwanisa ukuthi kube njalo, but khuluma sibe ukuthi hayi amasabatha babe because bayenza kanje amaroma babe ngoba bayenza kanje because babe ngasonto eyodwa. So okokuqala, I think okokuqala kumele sivumelane khona, maybe singavumelani, but I think okokuqala kumele sikhulume ukuthi ama-missionaries ebuya baba ngasobangani abalanda injongo eyodwa. Into yokuqala, ubaba mina, I hope he's not listening, but I did correct him, so maybe he won't be offended. Ubabami, he thought that there was an agreement between between amabhua lama-British. Ukuthi hayi lina qalani liyefika e-Africa laphana lihlale 200 years. Nxa sebengani sebethambile selisibiza thina sesibathathela umhlaba. But actually, amabhua abuye e-Africa bengabantu ababalekayo. As we highlighted before in one of our episodes, babengabantu ababengani bayabaleka ngale ngoba befuna ukubabulala. So it's a different understanding when you realize even lamakhiwa aso group eyi-one. So wonke umuntu nxa uzama ukuzwisisa ama-group abantu, ngena phakathi kwegroup yakhona uzwe ukuthi balandeni, bavela ngaphi, bafunani, and njalo into yakhona bazayithatha njani. So that's one important aspect. Let's all be clear about the differences among the groups, right? So the first problem here, I'm gonna attach the idea that colonization, the missionaries wanted colonization for personal benefit. They wanted the money, right? The missionaries wanted us to be colonized because they did not respect us. They didn't want us to be good people. It's true that the missionaries wanted colonization, but the reason the missionaries wanted, some missionaries wanted colonization, not all of them, because we can document that there were groups of missionaries who had problems with the British South Africa Company, for example, and accepting land from them. It's true that some missionaries wanted colonization, but the reason why they wanted colonization was so that they can have access to Black people, so they can be able to teach them what they thought was things that were going to benefit them. So it's different from the idea of subjugation. So if you go through, for example, in this book that I've highlighted, each church had a system, a plan. Okay, by this time, there's even mission fields which were being led by Black people. So it was not a situation where missionaries wanted colonization to subjugate Black people. Missionaries wanted colonization to protect Black people and have a shortcut to their conversion. So because they can't move around and they won't be ruled by people who were frustrating the efforts of the missionaries. So that's a dicey one, but you kumele sibili ukhangelisise kuhle ukuthi kulomchiyano phakathi wokuthi ama-missionary ayafuna kuphela ukuthi abantu besincindezele. But actually what the missionaries were trying to do, they thought nxa abantu laba bengaba colonized, then abasoze bencindezelwe kakhulu. Nxa bengancindezelwanga kakhulu, thina sizathola ithuba lokuthi sibachumayeze. So that's what the missionaries were thinking. And then the second thing, indaba yes-slavery, slave trade. Kumele simake sure ukuthi siyakhangela khona apha endabeni ye-slave trade. I-slave trade, kumele sizwisise ukuthi i-slave trade ayiqalanga ngamakhiwa. I-slave trade yayivele ikhona e-Africa ngoba sasithengisa abantu, sasitshaya i-slave trade lama-Arabs. You know, the Arabs would come to Zanzibar, to Mozambique, and collect slaves, which other tribes were taking and selling to the Arabs. So, even in West Africa, there were many tribes in Africa who would go inside the land and get people and sell them. So missionaries, for example, David Livingstone, they felt frustrated that people were being taken and sold, right? They felt frustrated that people were being taken and sold. Some missionaries, we have to be clear, some missionaries felt that way. So they started a movement to stop the slavery, the slave trade. So the people who started to fight very strongly against the slave trade, the movers and shakers in the anti-slave trade movement, the founders, they were Christians of a particular persuasion. You know, so you're talking the Methodists, about John Wesley, or you're talking about Anglicans, you know, people who were not more on the Calvinistic side. We did talk about Calvinism before. Bakhona amanye amaKristu ababekholwa ukuthi abantu abamnyama vele kumele bebe yizigqili. You know, there were people who believed that we're just supposed to be slaves. And those people were also among the missionaries, and they didn't want us to learn too much, particularly the Dutch, when they came, because they were Calvinistic in their bent. They thought that we were not elected, so what our job is just to be their slaves. So there were many people, and even Southern Baptists in America, many of them still thought, you know, slavery was okay because it's in the Bible, etc. But there were many sides of Christianity which stood up against the slavery and the slave trade. For example, the Adventists, the Methodists, the Anglicans, there were many people in those traditions that explicitly were against the slave trade. You couldn't be a member and be part of the religion. The Adventists in particular, you couldn't be part of the group if you have a slave. So we can see Uti, in bringing up the issue of slavery, sometimes people feel like, oh, the missionaries were there, they were involved, they were the ones planning it and pushing it forward. That's why they were trying to make us Christians so they can make us slaves. Actually, the people who were involved in the slave trade many times had wars with certain groups of missionaries, because missionaries would teach the slave how to read and write and teach them that they have dignity. So many slave traders did not want their slaves being taught Christianity. They did not want their slaves being taught how to read and write. So there was a war, a disagreement between many groups of missionaries and colonizers and slave traders, because of the impetus of the missionaries to try and uplift the standard of living for Africans, which we will get into in our next episode. For example, in South Africa, when the apartheid regime was put into full swing, the many missionary schools had to be closed because the apartheid government was saying to the missionaries, don't teach Black people certain subjects because they will never have jobs in that sort of field. They shouldn't have them. Either teach them bafundisa ama-subjects alula akhona anzima, because asifundi begcine becabanga ukuthi maybe labo bengaba ngabo-headmaster kumbe odokotela, asomsebenzi yabantu abamnyama leyo. So don't have such kind of curriculums. So because some Christians wanted to teach those things, their schools were closed down in South Africa. I'm only highlighting this to say there's a very, very significant group of missionaries who believed in the dignity of Africans. So to just say all missionaries wanted was just to push Africans down and treat them like dirt, this is not true. It is true that there was some groups of missionaries who thought that way, but there's a very strong strand which actually pushed the anti-slavery trade, the anti-slave trade movement, and ended up with abolishing slavery. Even the biggest movers and shakers in the African liberation movements, they came from mission schools. They came from mission schools. So you're seeing that the whole idea, the whole understanding, education, and everything for Africans was coming from certain factions of the missionary endeavor. And it's a good thing. I think maybe when we think again about what is the gospel, we can see why certain groups of Christians were so strong in fighting for the dignity of Africans. And then there's another issue. There's almost an idea akukhulunywa direct, but maybe abantu babezihlalele endlini yabo babizwa ukuthi hey asihambeni eAfrica lapha esingafika khona lina lizabayenzani, lina lizabachumayeza, ngabe ngaba amaKristu, thina sibe sithatha ilizwe, sithatha inotho, then sibe sishare inotho ngapha eceleni. This is not true. Abantu abaningi babuya bafa, right? They died. Many missionaries died poor because they had nothing. They had nothing. There was no official agreement. No one got rich by becoming a missionary. Most people would die because they didn't have immunity to the diseases that were here. If some mission stations would even be closed because there was no one who was willing to come. So it's not true that missionaries made money from becoming missionaries. Obviously, there could be one or two people who made money, and there are some groups of people who exploited others among missionaries. But by and large, I think it's a difficult proposition to say becoming a missionary gave people money. You could argue that it gave people power. I think that you could argue that it gave people power, it gave people a sense of significance. But to say that they did it for money, in general, it's not borne out by the evidence. Most of the people were sacrificing to go there, to go and be missionaries. They were leaving very, very important jobs in order to do that. The last thing, this is a really difficult one to tease out. Missionaries bafika bathi you're worshiping your ancestors are demons. Your ancestors are demons. Indaba leyi is a little bit difficult ukuzwisisa ukuthi kuhamba njani. Now kuthiwa your ancestors are demons, what's happening is it's two people who have two beliefs about the same thing. right? So I wish I had a diagram I could show you. So thina lapha ngazi sikhonza inlokhuzeni amadlozi and such things. Thina sabe sithi maybe, you know, sikhuluma labo khokho bethu and such things. The missionaries were saying no. Usathane eliqambela amanga asobo khokho bene elikhuluma labo laba ngamademoni, but asobo khokho bene. But what's happening now, abantu sebesithi no, ama-missionaries atokhokho bene ngamademoni. No, it's because we are looking at the same thing and seeing different things. The missionaries were looking at the phenomenon and saying, you think you're talking to your ancestor. It's a case of identity theft. It's a case of identity theft. The missionaries were alleging identity theft. They were saying the demons are stealing your ancestors' identity, right? But we were hearing that the missionaries are saying your ancestor is a demon. So it's a very subtle difference. It's an important difference. So what's happening is abantu ngokuhlanganisa into eziningi, okay, putting together what the missionaries think and what we are thinking, and then saying, oh, they are all talking about the same thing. So the missionaries think my uncle is a demon, my dead uncle is a demon. That's not true. What actually the missionaries were saying is the demons have stolen your uncle's identity. And you think you're talking to your uncle, but it's actually not your uncle. That is the truth behind that situation. So yeah, so for me, I think the reason why, and the other thing is Christianity was imported into Africa. We have dealt with this issue, but I think it's important to bring it up again. The idea is missionaries are the ones who brought Jesus to this continent. Jesus was brought to this continent by his parents, according to the Bible, you know, and the Ethiopian eunuch brought Christianity into Africa. Christianity has been in Africa for a long time. Christianity was in Africa hundreds of years before it was in Sweden. So the idea, sometimes you see even Boers in South Africa on Twitter saying that, hey, you are accepting our religion. That's a lie. Boers became Christians after the Africans were Christians, because there's the Ethiopian church. So it's very important, and the church fathers, it's very important to remember these facts. When you don't understand the truth of things, I think what's important here from what we're getting from this podcast is into eziningi zithatha isikhathi ukuthi uzizwisise. Nxa ufuna iqiniso about something, akumelanga ugijime ukuthi, oh, let me find a conclusion quickly. You need to take time to find the reasons and not act from emotion, but go clearly, slowly, like we have done. My podcast said, Lapha sakhangelile ukuthi, okay, eAfrica kwakunjani amakhenga ngabuyi, satshengisa ukuthi uNkulunkulu wayekhona wayencedisa abantu, and we talked about the bad things that the missionaries did, and now we're talking about the misunderstanding we have of the missionaries. And it's so important because we're going to go now into I think in the next episode. It's so important because, like Arthur said, akumelanga ukuthi ngoba ugeza umntwana enditshini amanzi sengcwele so sichithe umntwana lelokhuzeni ngamanzi, like you to throw away the baby with the bath water. You shouldn't go that way. If there's beautiful things anyway, it's our job to embrace it and take it. In Shona, they say chakanaka mukaka urungwine munyu. You don't have to lie about missionaries in order to make your point. We don't have to lie. We just have to cite the truth. And so in conclusion, the truth is the missionaries were like us, all of us. They were like our family, a mixed bag. There is good and bad. Not only just in our family, even in our own hearts. Someone has been quoting John Pauline. So even in our own hearts, the line between good and evil. Ungazikhangela sibili wena empilweni yakho ucabange enhliziyweni ukuthi, okay, have you always been good? Have you always been good to everyone? No. Sometimes you're good, sometimes you're bad. So it's a task for all of us to try and understand other people carefully Just like we don't want other people to say bad things about us without being careful to see, okay, I think you're exaggerating my badness here. We should not exaggerate the badness of people because we are trying to make a point. I don't know. I'll let Mdawini react to this. You're muted, my friend.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on how people tend to maybe broadly misunderstand the intentions of all missionaries. My take from what you said is we need to look at anything on a case-by-case scenario if we need to understand what the truth is. There is danger in generalization. I think if in politics, when people are fighting, they tend to group themselves into common groups, even when they are not related, in order to overpower their enemies. Like sometimes, if it's an argument between white people and black people, though I have issues about what white people or black people, what that means. But if there's a fight between white and black people, it means those who are being put under this umbrella of white, even when they're different, but because there's a war, with those who are darker skinned, they will group together and be seen as one homogeneous group. And those who are dark skinned, they also have a tendency to do that as well. But all of them are individuals. They are different. They are not the same. So it is maybe dangerous to look at everything in with one broad
brush over everybody.
So but at the same time, as much as I appreciated your comments on missionaries and ancestors being demons, as much as I want to argue that it's not all Christians that have that same belief. Others don't necessarily say it's demons. They'll say it's an evil spirit. It's your ancestors, yes, but you shouldn't worship them because God says you should not worship your ancestors. And that ancestor, when they come, they're going to do evil to you. But not necessarily to say they're demons. There are some people who say demons are separate things, but ancestors are they. Though you are not supposed to worship them. You are not supposed to talk to them, but they are there. They are there.
Which makes it a bit harder to not talk to them, doesn't it?
Well, if God says you shouldn't talk to them, for some people, that's the reason. God says we shouldn't talk to them, even when they are there. We shouldn't talk to them. But I didn't. This is maybe a theological discussion anyway, a separate. But what I'm actually driving at is not so much about the labels of the ancestors, but the other things that were lumped together with the ancestors. Because people, when they were having these ceremonies to these ancestors, they would maybe beat the drum.
Yes.
And now, because the drum is associated with ancestral worship. The missionaries then broadly condemned the drum. The drum.
But I think it's
let me finish.
Okay, sure.
And secondly, knowing one's history, knowing that you are son of who was son of who was son of who was son of who.
Yes.
In itself is not inherently wrong.
That's right.
Because you need to know where you come from. There's something about the psychology of origins. Knowing who you are, knowing where you come from, So when people say the ancestors are demons, which like I said can be seen as a theological view, which I myself believe, but the issue is then people negate.
Do you believe your ancestors are demons? Just to be clear, do you believe that
demons? Are not demons.
Okay, your ancestors are not demons.
Well, what I said, let me retake what I said. What I was meaning is, while I believe that the devil can present himself as an ancestor, that's what I meant. In case I didn't say it well. While I believe that, I also do believe that my history cannot be erased because it is a fact. It is a fact that whoever was my ancestor beget whoever. So, even the Bible in Matthew talks about origins. And before you finally come, then the last thing would be
so just to clarify, you're saying so then the idea of knowing your history was then also lumped in with ancestral worship, even though it wasn't. You're not alleging that the missionaries said you shouldn't know where you come from. You're saying that some people overzealously, because I don't think you can document that the missionaries said you shouldn't know who your ancestors were.
I'll only speak as a Seventh-day Adventist. The culture that I was brought in, kind of whitewashes that aspect of my origins.
So it becomes not necessary.
I don't see within Adventist circles in Zimbabwe where people would be encouraged to celebrate their origins, to say, I am son of who, the son of who, and son of who. What seems to happen is now that you're a Christian, you only care about the sweet by and by that's coming and all that, but negating the fact that you are also have your own history. I'll illustrate what I mean. The issue of going to just clear the graveyard where your ancestors are buried, like clear, even you see it in the Bible where maybe Abraham slept with his fathers in the King James Version language, where he's put and buried where his fathers. So that's something that's related to the African experience, because to be buried where your father lies.
Even Joseph said, take my bones with you.
Yes, take my bones. Yes. So those elements appeal to African culture, but in the Adventist settings or Christian, broadly speaking, all that is
it's like
kind of
to try and cut off the the temptation to worship your ancestors.
Yes.
Then it becomes. But I don't.
So lastly,
this is my pushback.
Lastly,
can I give you one?
Lastly, before you push back, we then have seen maybe a controversy in Adventist pastors or brethren who go to the United States and they visit the grave of the Adventist prophet, and they take photos showing this is where
my spiritual roots.
Yes, and now you do so that's my point, rather, to say in any Adventist like Zimbabwean Adventist would gladly want to go and see the grave of Ellen White. Gladly. But they would not want to go and see the grave of their forefathers. That's my point. So I'm saying the demonization of the ancestors, even when we theologically speaking, we're saying the demons were speaking through ancestors, the negative effect of that was everything about our past became demonized. Going to mark the graves, knowing the graves became demonized.
What's khangela futhi khonapho what's happening khonapho mntaweni. Ihubambanisa into ezinjani eziningi and putting it under one umbrella, and then you just discard everything. So in closing, if we can take away one idea, the main idea here, if you want to understand any idea, you want to come at it carefully, one by one, and ask yourself questions about each aspect of something. And you will realize that when you go little by little, thing by thing, you can see, oh, this is what was wrong, this is what was right. By not knowing what the missionaries did and what the missionaries didn't do, it's almost like a flow-on effect of what you're saying, with it. Because of this idea of shunning history, then people don't actually value or cherish the history of even how the church has come down to them in Zimbabwe. They may know how the church came from America to Zimbabwe, but to track the church in Zimbabwe, how did the church come from this side to where I am? All those things, that builds into your faith. We need to know those things because it's instructive. We can see how it works, not only in our faith, but also in our own history. It's good to know what Haitina Sapuma, you know, Elisuthu Sabuya Ramomzilikazi sahlala ngale sasisenza. You can, by knowing these things, it makes it so that no one can talk to you negatively about who you are, whether it's where you come from or what you believe, because you've actually taken time to do the work to understand the things that are involved in what you don't believe in and what you believe. Then it makes it easy for you to work things out. So the maligning of missionaries, the misunderstanding of missionaries, stems from sometimes not being careful how we're looking at things, just being in a rush with things. So let's be careful how we talk about each other. Let's be careful how we talk about our past. Let's be careful about how we talk about others who are not us. And let's just get as much evidence as possible for what we believe. So for anyone who is a Christian, I'm hoping that this episode has perhaps been encouraging to you. I know for myself, it was one of the happiest days of my life to find out that it was actually Christians, not all Christians, a specific kind of Christian, who fought the slave trade, hand-to-hand battle, until it was won in Africa, right? At least in our part of Africa, because I know that there's still slave trade in the Muslim parts of Africa, and perhaps even in some parts of Africa. But broadly speaking, the people who fought to get rid of the slave trade in Africa were missionaries, and a certain kind of missionaries. You don't know how good that makes you, how good it feels to know that your faith, the things you believe in, can actually result in good effects to other people. And that's what we need. If we see anything that we believe in that brings distraction to other people, we dump it. And if it brings life to other people, we embrace it and we rejoice in it. So siyabonga bazalwane for listening to this discussion. Next time when we look at our next topic on this subject. Thank you.